I woke before dawn on Christmas morning in a room so cold I could see my breath. Below me, the general store slept. Beyond that, the whole town of Birch Creek, Montana, slept under December snow. At home back in Boston, Mama would be making cinnamon bread. Papa would stoke the fire, grumbling about the cost of good wood, but doing it anyway because Christmas was Christmas. Here, I had a borrowed lamp and a determination sharp enough to cut. I dressed in the dark. Wool dress, practical boots. The shawl Mrs. Henderson had given me when I arrived 3 months ago. She'd meant it as charity. I wore it as armor. The streets were empty. My footsteps made the only sound, crunching through snow that sparkled like broken glass in the moonlight. I'd been warned Montana wasn't Boston. I'd been told a 21-year-old woman had no business teaching in a rough frontier town. I wondered if they were counting the days until I proved them right. I wondered if I was... The schoolhouse stood at the edge of town, small and proud and mine. I unlocked the door with hands that shook from cold. Not doubt. At least that's what I told myself. Inside smelled like chalk dust and pine smoke and possibility. I lit the stove first, coaxing fire from kindling the way my father had taught me. Some lessons cross continents. Then I lit the lamps. All 3 of them. Until the room glowed warm against the winter darkness outside. 20 desks sat empty. 20 students I'd teach come January when the spring term began. But today was Christmas, and the schoolhouse was mine alone. I wrote on the board in my careful teacher's hand, Christmas 1885. Then I arranged my desk, set out the one book I owned, a collection of Christmas stories bound in green cloth, gilt-edged and precious. I'd carried it 2,000 miles. It had survived the train, the wagon, the doubts. So had I. The windows wore frost patterns like lace. My breath clouded in the air despite the stove's best efforts. I made coffee on the small stove in the corner, the bitter smell mixing with wood smoke and chalk. At home, coffee came with cream and sugar. Here, I'd learned to drink it black. Learned to drink a lot of things black, my coffee. My tea. My thoughts about the choices that brought me here. I'd told my parents I wanted adventure. I'd told the school board I wanted to serve. I'd told myself I wanted freedom. All of it was true. None of it was complete. The truth, the whole truth, was that I'd been engaged to a man who wanted a wife as ornamental as the china in his mother's cabinet. A man who'd patted my hand when I mentioned teaching and said, "You won't need to work, dear." As if work and need were the only reasons to use a mind God gave you. I'd broken the engagement, shocked my family, disappointed my mother's friends, applied for teaching positions as far from Boston as geography allowed. Birch Creek, Montana, had written back. The schoolhouse was mine on Christmas. Everyone else had family, firesides, cinnamon bread, and carols. I had 20 empty desks and a determination that felt less like courage and more like stubbornness with better posture. I sat at my desk and opened the Christmas storybook. The pages fell open to the Nativity, the story I'd planned to read if anyone came. When anyone came, I corrected myself. Hope was a muscle. I was learning to exercise it. Outside, the sky lightened from black to gray to pale winter blue. Snow began falling, soft and steady, the kind that built quietly into something that mattered. I heard boots on the wooden steps. Someone was coming. On Christmas morning, someone had chosen this place over warmth and family. I wasn't alone in that. At least, I stood, smoothed my skirt, arranged my face into a teacher's welcoming expression. The door opened. Jack Murphy walked in. I knew him by reputation before I knew him by sight. In 3 months, I'd heard the warnings often enough to recite them. Don't try to teach Jack Murphy. 3 teachers have quit because of him. He's too stubborn, too stupid to learn. Mrs. Henderson had been particularly adamant. That boy is trouble. Miss Sarah. Best leave him be. But the man who walked into my schoolhouse didn't look like trouble. He looked like winter itself, tall and weathered and harder than the season. 23 years old, Mrs. Henderson had said. He looked older. Ranch work did that. So did shame, though I didn't know that yet. His eyes swept the room, the lit lamps, the stove's glow, the Christmas message on the board, me standing there in my wool dress and borrowed shawl. I watched something shift in his face. Surprise, maybe, or suspicion. Men who'd been disappointed learned not to trust welcome. Mr. Murphy, I said, Merry Christmas. He removed his hat. His hair was dark, touched with snow that melted in the warmth. Miss, would you like to sit? He hesitated, then chose a desk in the back row, sat with his arms crossed like armor. I recognized that posture. I'd worn it myself at my engagement party, smiling while my fiancé's mother explained how she'd redecorate my mind along with her son's house. I picked up the Christmas storybook, walked to his desk, set it in front of him. Would you read for me? I asked. His jaw tightened. I can read. I'm sure you can, I said, which wasn't a lie because I hadn't said I believed him. But I'd like to hear you. He opened the book, stared at the page like it had personally wronged him. Then he began. His eyes moved across the words, left to right, steady as tracking. His fingers gripped the book's edges. His shoulders tensed. He was performing reading the way an actor performs death, all the right movements. None of the reality. I knew that look. I'd seen it on my younger brother's face when Papa called him slow with numbers. Shame wearing a defiant mask, pride protecting a wound. Jack's voice stayed steady, but he wasn't reading. He was reciting something he'd memorized, maybe from hearing others read, or maybe just guessing based on pictures. Context. Desperate hope. When he finished, he closed the book, met my eyes with a challenge in his, go ahead. The look said, tell me I'm stupid. Tell me I'm hopeless. Tell me what everyone else has told me. I didn't. The room held its breath between us. The stove crackled. Snow tapped against windows. Christmas morning stretched long and quiet. Thank you, I said. He blinked. Clearly, that wasn't the response he'd expected. I walked back to my desk, sat down, folded my hands like a teacher, though inside I was calculating, planning, deciding. He wasn't stupid. Stupid men don't show up on Christmas morning. Stupid men don't try 3 times after failing. Stupid men don't cross their arms against humiliation and show up anyway. He was illiterate, and he'd come here hoping I wouldn't notice. Or maybe hoping I would. Maybe hoping I'd be different from the teachers who'd called him unteachable and walked away. Is there anything else? Miss, his voice was careful, formal, preparing for dismissal. Yes? I said. Jack, stay. He stood but didn't leave. Just waited. Hat in hands. Face arranged into that expression men wear when they're bracing for a blow. I'd seen my father wear it when his business failed. My brother, when Papa criticized his work. Dignity, I'd learned, was fragile in men. Pride was the shell they built around it. I know you can't read, I said. His hands tightened on his hat. I can sign, and I also don't care what the last 3 teachers said. That stopped him. He stared at me like I'd started speaking a foreign language. Maybe I had. Kindness was foreign enough in a town that had labeled him unteachable. If you want to learn, I continued, I'll teach you. The silence stretched. Outside, church bells rang distant, calling people to Christmas service. Inside, a 21-year-old teacher and a 23-year-old ranch hand stood in a schoolhouse that smelled like hope and coffee and burning pine. Why would you do that? His voice was rough, suspicious of gifts. Because you came here on Christmas morning, I said. Because you deserve to read your own name. I didn't say the rest that I'd traveled 2,000 miles to prove I could teach. That I'd broken an engagement and disappointed my family and chosen this hard, cold, lonely place because I believed education mattered. That his illiteracy wasn't a reflection on him, but on every teacher who'd given up. That I was 21 years old and declaring war on impossibility. I work the ranch, he said. Sunup to sundown most days. Evenings, then 3 times a week, Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday. People will talk. People already talk. I smiled, small and wry. About you, about me, about whether Montana's too rough for Boston teachers. Let them talk. We'll be busy learning. He studied me with eyes that had learned to measure threat and intent. Whatever he saw made him nod. Slow and careful. Like a man accepting a contract he didn't quite trust. What do you need from me? He asked. Show up. Bring firewood if you can. The school board's stingy with coal. Bring patience with yourself. I'll bring patience with you. I'm not stupid, he said, and the words carried weight. Like he'd had to say them too many times to too many people. I know, I said simply. Stupid men don't keep trying. Something shifted in his face, the armor cracking. Just a little. He looked at me like I'd offered him a fortune. Maybe I had. Words were fortune enough. The ability to read a contract before signing it, to write a letter home, to understand the world beyond what others chose to tell you that was wealth beyond gold. When do we start? He asked. 3 days. Tuesday evening, come at dusk, after your work. He nodded, put his hat back on, walked to the door, then stopped. Miss Sarah. Yes, thank you. 2 words. The same 2 I'd said to him earlier. But his carried different weight gratitude mixed with disbelief. Hope wrapped in careful protection. After he left, I sat alone in the warm schoolhouse, cleaned the chalkboard, banked the fire, made another cup of bitter coffee, and stared out at the snow falling on Birch Creek. Montana? I'd just made either the biggest mistake of my teaching career or the only choice that mattered. Tomorrow, I'd figure out which. Tonight, I'd just survive the wondering. 3 days later, he appeared at dusk with an armload of split wood. I'd half expected him not to come. Expected him to wake Tuesday morning and decide pride was easier than trying. Expected the town's whispers to convince him I was wasting his time. But there he stood, arms full of firewood, snow dusting his shoulders like powder. Mr. Murphy, I said, opening the door wider. Come in. He stacked the wood by the stove with the efficiency of someone who'd done it 1,000 times. I made coffee while he worked, the familiar ritual of scooping grounds, pouring water, waiting for the pot to boil. When we both had cups, his black, mine black. Everything in Montana black. I pulled a chair to my desk and gestured for him to sit. We'll start with the alphabet, I said. I drew the letters on the board. A, B, C. Each one careful, clear, accompanied by a word, apple, book, cat. He copied them on a slate I'd found in the school supplies. His handwriting was terrible letters, crooked, sizes uneven. The grip on the chalk, too tight. He copied like a man learning to tame wild horses, careful, uncertain, ready to fail. Why does G sound like that? He asked after the 7th letter. Because someone decided it should. I said, English breaks its own rules constantly. You'll hate it. Already do, he muttered. But I caught the hint of a smile. We worked through the alphabet twice. Then I taught him to write his name, Jack, 4 letters, his entire identity. He stared at the slate like those letters were strangers. His fingers traced the J, the curve of it, the sharp angles of the A and K. Then something shifted in his face recognition. Maybe. Or ownership. "That's me," he said, quiet, almost to himself. "That's you." I confirmed. He looked up, and I saw something I hadn't expected. Not gratitude, though that was there. Not pride, though that flickered too. Wonder. Pure, unguarded wonder that he could claim his own name in writing. Teaching books made it simple. Student learns. Teacher instructs. They never mentioned the way a grown man's hands shake holding chalk. The dignity in his concentration. The weight of watching someone write themselves into existence. "Can I—" He hesitated. "Can I take this?" To practice, students usually left materials at school. It was the rule kept supplies from being lost or damaged. I handed him the slate. "Bring it back Thursday." Some rules matter, some don't. After he left, I sat in the empty schoolhouse and finished my cold coffee. Outside, stars appeared in the Montana sky, hard and bright and infinite. I'd watched Jack Murphy trace his name like it was a fortune. Maybe it was. I wondered when I'd started counting his footsteps on the stairs. Wondered when Tuesday and Thursday and Saturday evenings had become the shape of my week. Wondered when teaching had stopped being about proving myself and started being about witnessing. Transformation. Wondered a lot of things that had no answers yet. Thursday, he appeared with the slate. Every inch of it covered in JACK, written over and over in improving script. "Good," I said. He smiled. We learned the rest of the alphabet. 2 weeks of lessons built into routine. He arrived at dusk, always with firewood, always with the slate I'd given him. I made coffee, terrible and bitter and somehow necessary. We worked by lamplight, his concentration fierce, my patience tested and holding. He learned the alphabet. Then simple words: cat, dog, hat, ranch, work, read. His hunger for learning was almost physical, the way he leaned forward when I explained vowels, the way his fingers tapped patterns when he was trying to remember spelling, the way he'd repeat words under his breath like prayers. One evening in late January, after he'd successfully read a simple sentence I'd written, "The dog ran to the ranch," he set down the slate and asked, "Why'd you really come here?" I looked up from the lesson plan I'd been preparing. "To teach. Young woman. Educated. Could have taught in a city. Boston." You said, "Could have stayed there." Could have, I agreed. But didn't. I debated lying. Debated giving him the simple answer: adventure. Opportunity. A desire to serve. All true. All incomplete. Instead, I told him the truth. I was engaged, I said. He was suitable. Well off. From a good family. My parents were delighted. Jack waited, his expression neutral. But I could see the careful attention, the way he listened when learning mattered. He wanted a wife who'd stay quiet and grateful, who'd pour tea and raise children and never ask for more than the life he'd designed. I paused. I wanted a life that was mine. So you ran. So I chose. I corrected. Running implies fear. I wasn't afraid of him. I was afraid of disappearing into his expectations. Jack nodded slowly. Guess we're both learning to read things we couldn't before. The observation was so unexpected, so perceptive. I laughed. I suppose we are? He picked up his coffee cup, then set it down without drinking. I can't read because my father died when I was 12. Mama needed money. Ranch work paid. School didn't. And the other teachers, first one tried for a month, said I was too far behind. His jaw tightened. Second one lasted 2 weeks. Told Mama not to waste my time or hers. Third one, he shrugged. Lasted 1 lesson. Called me stupid to my face. I felt anger bloom, hot and protective. You're not stupid. I know that now, he said. Didn't then. We sat in the lamplight, trading truths like currency. His illiteracy for my broken engagement. His shame for mine, even exchanges. The kind that build bridges between people who'd both learned to protect themselves. I noticed I'd set out 2 coffee cups without thinking. When had that happened? When had the singular ritual of my evening coffee expanded to include him? When had... I started measuring time by Tuesday, Thursday. Saturday, instead of the endless stretch of days between, "What will you do?" I asked. "When you can read." He considered the question seriously. Read contracts before I sign them. Lost money that way, signing things I didn't understand. He paused. Maybe write letters. Mama's sister lives in California. Haven't heard from her in years because neither of us can write. Anything else? He looked at me. And something in his expression made my breath catch. Read books. All the books I couldn't before. Learn about places I'll never see. Understand things beyond this town. That's a good reason, I said quietly. It's your reason, too. He said, why you teach? Opening doors for people. He was right. I'd never articulated it that clearly. But he'd seen it. Jack Murphy, who couldn't read 3 weeks ago, had read me perfectly. Thank you, I said. He smiled. For what? For showing up, for trying, for helping me remember why this matters. That night, after he left, I washed both coffee cups, set them on the shelf, noticed them sitting there, side by side, ordinary as breathing. Wondered when my careful solitude had become our comfortable companionship. Wondered if I minded. Decided I didn't. Sunday social at the church was mandatory for respectable women. I went because Mrs. Henderson had made it clear that teachers were held to standards. I wore my best-dressed dark blue, practical. Boring and braided my hair in a crown that made me look older than 21. The church hall smelled like coffee and cake and judgment. I saw Jack across the room with other ranch hands. He wore clean clothes, hair combed, looking uncomfortable in the social ritual of Sunday gathering. Our eyes met briefly. He nodded. I nodded back. Propriety observed. Mrs. Henderson materialized at my elbow with 3 other women whose names I could never quite remember. They wore expressions I'd learned to recognize concern that masked criticism. Help that masked control. Miss Sarah, Mrs. Henderson said, her voice carrying, "We need to speak with you." Of course. We hear you're still wasting time with Jack Murphy. Not teaching. Wasting time. I felt my spine straighten, the way it had when my fiancé's mother suggested I stop reading so many books. I'm teaching Mr. Murphy to read. Yes? 3 good teachers tried and failed. One of the other women said, her name might have been Margaret or Martha. He's too old, too set in his ways. He's 23, I said mildly, hardly ancient. You're neglecting preparation for the spring term, Mrs. Henderson continued. The real students who deserve your attention. Real students. As if Jack's determination to learn at 23 mattered less than children forced into classrooms by parents. The spring term doesn't begin until March, I said, keeping my voice level. I have time for both. It's improper, Margaret or Martha whispered, loud enough to be heard. A young woman, alone with a ranch hand, 3 evenings a week. There it was. Not concern for my teaching priorities, concern for my reputation. For the appearance of impropriety in a town that watched single women like hawks watch rabbits. We meet in the schoolhouse. I said, the building with windows. Anyone who doubts propriety is welcome to observe lessons. Mrs. Henderson's expression hardened. We're trying to help you. Dear, you're young, new to teaching. You don't understand how things work here. I understood perfectly. Things worked the way they always worked. People who'd never tried something were certain it couldn't be done. People who'd never seen potential dismissed it as impossible. Thank you for your concern, I said, the words polite and empty. I'll take it under consideration. I turned to leave and saw Jack's face. He'd heard everything. Stood near enough to catch every word of my public humiliation. His expression had gone carefully blank, the look of someone who'd learned to expect disappointment. I walked past him, past the other ranch hands, past the coffee and cake and Sunday pretense. Walked out into January, cold that felt cleaner than the warm hall. Outside. I breathed fog into frozen air. My hands shook, but not from temperature. Maybe they were right. Maybe I was playing at teaching, proving nothing except my own stubborn pride. Maybe I'd come to Montana because I couldn't handle criticism in Boston. And I couldn't handle it here either. Maybe Jack would be better off without hope. Hope, after all, was the cruelest gift when it came with inevitable failure. I walked back to my boarding room. Didn't light a lamp. Just sat in the dark and questioned everything. Tuesday came anyway. I prepared the lesson, expecting emptiness. Jack had heard the town's verdict. He was smart enough to know when to quit. But at dusk, I heard boots on the steps. He appeared in the doorway, firewood in his arms, determination on his face. You heard what they said? I asked. He nodded. You still want to learn? He set down the firewood, met my eyes, more now than ever. Something in my chest loosened. Why this? Because they think we can't. He said simply, best reason there is. I smiled, despite everything. Yes, it is. We worked on compound words that night. Understanding. Nevertheless, determination. Words longer than doubt. The school board chairman visited on a Thursday afternoon. I was preparing lessons when he knocked Mr. Carlson. 60-something. Weathered and formal. A man who'd built a ranch from nothing and expected the same efficiency from everything, including education. Miss Sarah, he said, removing his hat. May I have a word? Of course. Mr. Carlson. He didn't sit. Just stood in my classroom, looking at the alphabet still on the board from Tuesday's lesson with Jack, looking at the 2 coffee cups on my desk, looking at me. Concerns have been raised, he said. I waited. About your private arrangement with Mr. Murphy. Private arrangement. As if I were running a gambling operation instead of teaching a man to read. I'm teaching him, I said. That's what teachers do. He's not enrolled. The school board hasn't approved private instruction. And frankly, Miss Sarah. 3 experienced teachers couldn't teach that boy. What makes you think you can 3 teachers who gave up? I thought 3 teachers who decided a student's worth based on quick failure instead of long possibility. He's learning, I said. He can read over 300 words. He can write full sentences. He understands phonics and grammar basics. Mr. Carlson's expression didn't change. That's admirable. But the spring term begins in 6 weeks. We need you focused on preparing for real students. Real students again. Jack, apparently, wasn't real enough. I can do both, I said. The board feels otherwise. He put his hat back on. Stop the private lessons with Mr. Murphy. Focus on your actual job. Or we'll find a teacher who can... Not a direct firing, but pressure enough. My position wasn't permanent. I was on probation, proving myself worthy of a permanent contract. Is that the board's decision, I asked, or Mrs. Henderson's? It's mine. Mr. Carlson said, and you'd be wise to respect it. He left. I sat alone in the classroom as afternoon light faded. Sat through the time Jack would normally arrive. Didn't light the lamps. Didn't make coffee. Just sat in growing darkness and faced the truth. I could keep teaching Jack and lose my position. Return to Boston in disgrace. Prove everyone right who'd said I wouldn't last. Disappoint the school board. Disappoint myself. Accomplish nothing. Or I could stop. Focus on the spring term. Keep my job. Build a teaching career on compromise and pragmatism. Both paths felt like losing. I thought about my mother's voice, the conversation we'd had before I left Boston. Teaching isn't about being loved, daughter. It's about being right when it matters. But what if being right meant being unemployed? What if principal was just pride by another name I found? Paper in my desk. Wrote 2 letters by the last of the daylight. One was my resignation. Short, professional, effective immediately. The other was to Jack, explaining why I couldn't continue, apologizing for starting something I couldn't finish, wishing him well. I held both letters and felt the weight of choice. Maybe I wasn't brave. Maybe I was just stubborn. Maybe there's no difference except brave gets praised and stubborn gets fired. I'd come to Montana to prove I could stand alone. But standing alone is just loneliness with better posture. What was I proving? And to whom Jack would survive without reading? People did. The world was full of illiterate men who worked and lived and managed. But he'd shown up on Christmas morning. He'd asked to learn thank you. He'd come back after hearing the town call teaching him a waste. He'd chosen hope. Could I choose less? I struck a match, lit the stove, fed my resignation letter to the flames and watched it burn. The letter to Jack, I folded. Put in my pocket. Insurance. I told myself. Cowardice. Myself answered back. Tomorrow I'd decide. Tonight I'd just survive my doubt. Tomorrow came too soon and not soon enough. I requested a formal school board meeting through Mr. Carlson. He looked surprised, but agreed. The meeting was set for Saturday afternoon in the church hall. Saturday morning, I prepared, not lessons, but evidence. I compiled everything Jack had learned sample writing, lists of words he could read, sentences he'd composed. 3 months of progress documented in careful teacher's hand. I also made a decision. I wouldn't defend just Jack. I'd defend the principal. The church hall filled with board members, 5 men, 2 women. Mrs. Henderson watching from the back with satisfaction already on her face. She expected my surrender. Expected me to apologize and promise to focus on real students. She'd miscalculated. Thank you for meeting, I began, standing at the front like I'd stood in front of classrooms. I understand there are concerns about my teaching methods. Not methods, Mr. Carlson said. Priorities? Then let's discuss priorities. I placed Jack's writing samples on the table. 3 months ago, Jack Murphy couldn't write his own name. Today, he can read newspapers, write letters, and understand basic mathematics. That's not the point, Mrs. Henderson interjected. Then what is the point? I asked. Is it that he's too old because education has no age limit? Is it that previous teachers failed because their failure doesn't predict mine? Or is the point that I'm a young woman making decisions you don't approve of? The room went quiet. We're concerned about the spring term. One of the board members said, Mr. Peterson, who owned the bank. 20 children need your attention. And they'll have it. I said, the spring term is 6 weeks away. I have lessons prepared, curriculum planned, materials organized. Teaching Jack 3 evenings a week doesn't interfere with that. It's improper, Mrs. Henderson said. A young woman alone with a ranch hand. It's education, I corrected, in a public building with windows. If propriety is the concern, anyone's welcome to chaperone. My voice didn't shake. That surprised me. I'd expected fear, found fury instead. Good. Fury was useful. This sets a precedent, another board member argued. Next, you'll be teaching every ranch hand who asks. Would that be so terrible? I asked. A town where adults can improve themselves, where education is available to anyone willing to learn. We have limited resources, Mr. Carlson said. Teaching costs nothing but time. I'm donating mine. But why, Mrs. Henderson stood, her voice carrying, why waste effort on someone who's proven unteachable? He hasn't proven anything except perseverance. I said, 3 teachers quit. He kept trying. That's not unteachable. That's determined. I looked around the room, meeting eyes, making them see me. Jack Murphy walked into my classroom on Christmas morning. He could have been anywhere warm, comfortable, with family. Instead, he chose learning. He chose possibility over comfort. If I turn away from that choice, I don't deserve to be a teacher. The door opened. Jack stood in the doorway. He wore his Sunday clothes, held his hat, looked uncomfortable and determined. His presence wasn't theatrical. He hadn't planned this entrance. He'd simply come because it was Saturday evening. Lesson time. The room's attention shifted to him. Mr. Murphy, Mr. Carlson said, this doesn't concern you. Respectfully, sir, it does. Jack said, his voice was steady, careful. The voice of someone who'd learned to speak when spoken to and otherwise stay quiet. Miss Sarah's been teaching me to read. I can do it now. That seems relevant. He walked forward. Picked up one of the newspapers on the table, the Birch Creek Gazette. Opened it. Read aloud. The winter of 1885 has proven difficult for local ranchers. Snow accumulation and bitter cold have created challenges for livestock management and feed supplies. He set down the paper. I couldn't do that 3 months ago. Couldn't read a contract, a price list, a letter. Now I can. Miss Sarah did that. Seems like good teaching to me. I saw Jack's face, pride and discomfort mixed. He hadn't asked me to fight this battle. I'd chosen it. The way he'd chosen to walk into a classroom on Christmas morning. Choices echoing. No one questions Miss Sarah's ability, Mr. Carlson said, though his tone was grudging. We question her judgment. My judgment, I said, is that anyone willing to learn deserves someone willing to teach. Fire me if you must, but you can't make me stop believing people can change. I gathered my papers. I'll continue teaching Jack until spring term begins. After that, I'll evaluate whether I can manage both. If the board feels that's unacceptable, I understand. But I won't abandon a student who's done everything right just because it's inconvenient. I walked toward the door. Jack stepped aside. Miss Sarah? Mr. Peterson called. I turned. The board will discuss this. We'll send word of our decision. I nodded. Left the church hall with Jack following. Outside, winter evening had settled cold and clear, stars beginning to appear. You didn't have to do that. Jack said, yes? I answered, I did. He smiled. Small and genuine. Thank you. Thank you for reading, I said, for proving me right. We walked through town together improper. Probably. But I'd stopped caring about. Probably. We'd both chosen something more important than reputation. The school board sent word Monday morning. I wasn't fired, wasn't approved either, but they didn't stop me. Sometimes that's all victory is permission through silence. Spring arrived slowly, the way it does in Montana. Snow melted inch by stubborn inch. Windows opened. The world softened from white to brown to the first brave green. The spring term began in March with 20 students, ages 6 to 14. I taught reading and arithmetic and geography, watched children learn and struggle and succeed. Routine settled morning lessons, afternoon planning, evening peace. Jack still came Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday, by April. He'd progressed beyond basic reading. We tackled complex sentences, literary passages, the kind of material that required thinking, not just decoding. One evening, he brought the Christmas storybook, the green cloth one, gilt-edged, that I'd carried from Boston. "I want to try," he said. I handed it to him. Which story? The Nativity, the one I pretended to read that first day. He opened to the familiar page, drew a breath, read. His voice was hesitant, but accurate. He stumbled over swaddling and manger, but he worked through them. Read about shepherds and angels and a baby in humble circumstances who changed the world. The same words, the same book, everything different. When he finished, he looked up. "I did it." "You did," I said. We sat in the lamplight, teacher and student. Two people who'd both chosen something difficult and discovered it was worth the cost. "What now?" I asked. "What will you do with reading?" He considered. Already read my ranch contract. Found out I'd been underpaid 2 years. Had a conversation with the foreman. Good. Writing to Mama's sister in California. Told her about lessons, about you. He smiled. She wrote back. "First letter I've ever received with my name on it. That's wonderful. Thinking about other things, too." He said, "Maybe teaching someday." Kids like I was too poor for school, too proud to ask for help. Someone should teach them. I felt something warm bloom in my chest. Pride. Maybe. Or hope. Or the recognition that teaching isn't giving knowledge, but recognizing what's already there. "You'd be good at that," I said. Learned from the best. We talked about his plans, about books he wanted to read, about the world he could access now that words had unlocked it. 2 coffee cups sat on my desk, both used, both washed. Set out again for next lesson. A routine so familiar, I'd stopped noticing when it started. "Miss Sarah," Jack said as he was leaving. "Yes." "Why'd you really fight for me at the board meeting? You could have lost your job." I considered lying, giving a teacher's answer about duty and principle, but we'd built something on truth. Seemed wrong to abandon it now. "Because you came on Christmas morning," I said. "Because you proved everyone wrong. Because someone needed to believe in you. And I was there." I paused. "Because you reminded me why I became a teacher. Not to be safe. To matter." He nodded slowly. "You matter." "So do you," I said, after he left. I sat alone in the schoolhouse. The same room where I'd spent Christmas morning. Lonely and determined. The same desk, same lamp, same Montana wind testing the windows. But everything was different. I'd thought teaching meant giving knowledge. I'd learned it meant recognizing what was already their potential, waiting for permission. I'd thought coming to Montana meant proving I could stand alone. I'd learned standing alone is just the beginning. Building something together is the point. Mama wrote asking when I'd come home. I wrote back, "I am home. Home is where you choose to matter. Years later, people asked if I was the teacher who taught Jack Murphy to read. I always corrected them. I was the teacher who watched Jack Murphy teach himself. I just had the privilege of being there. Sometimes that's enough. Sometimes that's everything. The town still warns new teachers about difficult students. I smile when I hear it. Difficult just means deserving. Some lessons I learned aren't in books. Some lessons require a cold classroom, bitter coffee, and the courage to believe in someone when belief is the rarest gift. Jack eventually did teach. Started evening classes for adults who'd missed education. I helped sometimes, watching him offer others what I'd offered him, not rescue, but recognition. We stayed friends, Jack and I. The kind of friendship built on mutual respect, shared purpose, the knowledge that we'd both been brave when it mattered. He married eventually. A woman who appreciated a man who could read her love letters and write his own. I attended the wedding, watched him recite vows he'd written himself, and felt that warm pride again. My teaching contract became permanent. I stayed in Birch Creek for 30 years, taught hundreds of students, fought dozens of battles over who deserved education, won most of them. But that first one, the Christmas morning beginning, the town's opposition, the choice to fight for one person's right to learn that one shaped everything after. I'd spent so long protecting my independence. I'd forgotten independence isn't solitude. It's choosing connection on your own terms. I'd fled Boston to escape disappearing into someone else's expectations. I found myself in Montana by helping someone else find himself. Strange how the things we run from lead us exactly where we need to be.